The Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. That's right, it's that time of day or night, depending where you are, for the Kev Baker Show. I'm Kev Baker, and I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight, whether it be right here on the home network of Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com, or one of the many various other ways that we've got to listen to the show. One of my personal favourites, TuneIn Radio app. You can get that on the smart TV, so you can shove that on in the background while you're doing the housework, or maybe that's just me when I'm doing my little Mrs. Doubtfire bit during the day. And listen, folks, this is a very special day today, and I've got a really special guest to mark the occasion. But before we get there, if you missed last night's show with Walter Bosley, wow. I mean, I highly recommend you check that out in the archive over at the tfrlive.com website. It's also up over on YouTube. And I think Walter, possibly in my opinion, puts together one of the most compelling, best researched and down to earth, if you pardon the pun, kind of cases to be made for a breakaway civilization that goes back a whole lot further than I ever imagined. Way back into the 1850s and secret flying craft around that time. Please check that one out. Honestly, I can't recommend it highly enough. And how do you top last night? Well, I think tonight might just do it. Because, like I was saying, it's a very special day in itself, without even bringing the guest into the equation. Because today is Beltane. Now, this is the day when the sun is at 15 degrees of Taurus, or May the 1st. Now, over here, we have like the May Day protests. France, it was getting a bit violent today. Rome, they were on standby for violence. And you see a lot of kind of rioting and protesting around this time of year. But what's it all about? Well, you know, it goes by the name of Beltane, but it comes under various guises. May Day, Walburga, Gallen May, Roodmas, Walpurgisnacht, Hexennacht, Tana's Day, Samdra, La Baltin, and many more names. And Beltane is the opposite of Samhain on the traditional Celtic-based Wheel of the Year. And like Samhain, the night when the veil between the worlds is quite thin. Some say fairies return from their winter hideaway and the night is filled with magic and beauty. Others say the spirits of those who will be born in the coming year return to the land of the living on this very day. Now, Beltane is also one of the fire festivals of the Wiccan calendar. In ancient times, this may have been a time of sacrifice, including human sacrifice. The tradition of leaping over the fire may be a reflection of this, or it may be similar to the custom of passing livestock through two bonfires for blessings and fertility. And for me, this is one of the go-to dates. This will be one of the circled dates in the calendar of any occultist. A very important date indeed. So to add to the date, and it's almost synchronistic this, because, you know, this show was meant to take place some time ago, but I wasn't feeling too well at the time. And we know how the universe works. Well, somehow the show ended up being organised for today, Beltane. And I think that should give us all a clue that this is going to be an absolute cracker, because tonight we're going to be getting into a subject that, you know, it really brings all of us together, whether it's Jay-Z, John Lennon, Madonna, or even the faux Paul conspiracy. Music is something that appeals to us all. Now, tonight we're going to be going behind the scenes of the music industry and talking about the kind of things that our favourite artists and bands would rather we didn't even know about. We will see that, just as with Hollywood, there's another side to the songs and singers that we love so much. Now, the music industry, it provides us with so many conspiracy threads to pull on. It truly is enough to make your head spin. We've got symbolism, links to the occult, mind control, and too many more to list. We could speak for weeks, literally, about all the strangeness within the music industry and barely scratch the surface. It's a deep and wonderful subject, and one that literally affects us all in ways that we may not even imagine, but we'll learn more about tonight. So how on earth's name do we try to make sense of all of this? Well, there's one guy out there who's putting in all of the time, the deep research, and he is connecting the dots. And his name is Mark Devlin. Now, Mark's a returning guest to the show, but if you haven't heard him before, he's a UK-based club and radio DJ, music journalist, and author. Now, as a DJ, he has specialised in all forms of black music and has played live in over 40 countries. In 2010, he underwent what he refers to as a conscious awakening. Now, there's something that myself and all the listeners will definitely be well aware of. And this brought in a new awareness of what's really going on in Mark's world. Now, his special area of interest was how all of this ties into the mainstream music industry and the way in which the big names out there, the A-list artists, have been used to manipulate and mind control the masses in line with a much larger agenda. Now he presents public talks and presents actual slideshows with all of the images to go along with all of these subjects he covers, as well as appearing on radio shows like this. He has his own 2 regular podcasts, and he loves to create contentious musical DJ sets, conscious musical DJ sets. Mark, welcome back to the show, sir.
Well, they're contentious as well, Kev.
Well, This is very true. That must have been some kind of Freudian slip, man. But here we are.
I think it probably was, yeah.
The Beltane holiday, we come together like this. And like I was saying, it's almost as if the universe made it happen on this date, man.
There's a beautiful irony to it, isn't there? Because, as you said, this date was selected completely randomly. We were supposed to do this show a few weeks ago. We rescheduled. I looked at my diary, and this just happened to be a free date that I could make. And it was only afterwards that I realised, damn, this is Beltane, Walpurgisnacht, this hugely significant date in the occult calendar, in pagan traditions and various different occult traditions from the ancient world. And this happens a lot with shows that I schedule. I don't realise until afterwards the significance of the date. So it feels as if forces are conspiring to make this happen. So I did a show with Mike Williams, Sage of Quay, on 22nd of March, 322, which is another important number. It's associated with Skull and Bones, the secret society out of Yale University. And the 22nd of March is actually the start of the 40-day period that we're just coming out of to usher in spring. And it's a period of sacrifice in different occult belief systems. We can get into that. But I just happened to schedule this show with Mike, and then I realized, well, this is 322. Then last year, I had a show scheduled with Raconteurs News, and the only date that I could make around that period was 9/11, September 11th. So we had plenty to talk about regarding that date. Then I did another one on the 22nd of November, which is the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And it's also the date that the late author Dave McGowan passed away on. And I only realised afterwards that there was some significance to that date as well. And so here we are on the 1st of May, not by design, or is it?
Well, this is the question. And, we were having a really quite deep and philosophical quick chat before the show tonight. And if that's anything to go by, I really think the listeners are going to enjoy this one. And it's this Beltane festival I really want to drill down on to start with, Mark, because I mentioned in there a lot of people kind of associate this time, especially in the Wiccan tradition, with a time of sacrifice. Now, having done a show with you before, we see very questionable events and deaths happening in and around not only Hollywood, but the music scene as well. And a lot of people concentrate on Hollywood, but I'm glad you're bringing together all of the musical stuff as well, because just as an effective form of programming as Hollywood. But it's these kind of sacrifices, these rituals that seem to take place. Today, I was half expecting some kind of big musical name to pass away just to mark the occasion.
Well, me too, yeah. It's almost disappointing that they didn't. I'm just being flippant when I say that. There's certain names that I wouldn't be too sad about, but we won't go into those. Yeah, very interesting what happens in my neck of the woods on this date, actually, the city of Oxford, where I was born. A lot of people seem to think that I'm connected in some way to the university or the academic establishment of Oxford. Absolutely not. Never went to university, was never a part of that. It's just somewhere I happen to have been born. That's all. And I've always lived around these parts. But there's this strange ritual that takes place at dawn on the 1st of May in Oxford, where a bunch of students from the university jump off a bridge known as Magdalen Bridge into the river. And the river that flows through Oxford is the Thames. But while it flows through Oxford, it takes on the name of the Isis. Interesting. It's known as the Isis just in Oxford, and then it becomes the Thames again. There's this ancient ritual that's been going on for, 300 years or more probably, where these kids jump off the bridge into the river. And the thing about it is the river is very shallow, and every year there are casualties. Kids break their legs and, undergo all kinds of horrific accidents because it's not the safest thing to do. But nevertheless, it goes on every year. The police close all the roads in the area, and it's complete ritual. And I'm sure most of these kids taking part in it have no idea what it symbolizes, what it's all about. They just do it because it's tradition and they've been trained to do it. Another thing that happens quite a lot in these parts and maybe all over the UK is May dancing, which is where young kids are made to take part in these maypole rituals. And this is a fertility ritual. So you've got this maypole, which is a phallic symbol representing, male fertility. And it's got all these ribbons coming out the top of it. And these kids grab the ribbons and dance around the maypole and create these patterns with the ribbons. And this goes back to pagan times. And, it's associated with this time of the year. It's preparing for the return of the sun to its highest point in the sky in the northern hemisphere, which works on both a globe and a flat model, by the way. You can still have hemispheres in both those systems. But anyway, it's preparing for the summer solstice of the 21st of June because we're into the 8th of the year now that leads up to that point. And these rituals are all about celebrating the sun and its life-giving properties and its return to that high vortex point. So we're at the end of this 40-day period now to usher in spring, which begins round about the 22nd of March and runs all the way up to the 1st of May. And in the ancient calendar, the year actually began in March. And there were 10 months to the year. You can see this by looking at the months of September, October, November, December, and looking at the start of those names. Sept meaning 7, Oct meaning 8. They were the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th months of the year before January and February were added. And I think that was just another way to tilt us out of balance with the natural order of things and the harmonious links that humans have with their surroundings. It's like changing the clocks every year. It throws us out of sync. It just puts us into chaos and we lose that connection with our surroundings. Just another trick in the toolbook of the controllers, But
you've got a radio and you just you're not quite tuned in, right? It's just kind of off the setting, and it's so annoying because it's nearly right, but it's not quite right. And, that's a perfect way of thinking about, why they changed the calendar for a start.
Yeah, and we get a cover story for everything. We're told we changed the clocks because of the farmers, so they get an extra hour of daylight to do their work. Just sounds like BS to me. It just sounds like a classic cover story to give a simplistic, infantile explanation for things, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense that everybody takes part in this just because of that reason. So anyway, you've got the year divided up into these eighths. You've got these midway points between the solstices and the equinoxes. So summer solstice, 21st of June, winter solstice, 21st of December, then the equinoxes round about the 21st of March and the 21st of September. The midway points are round about the 1st of February, round about the 1st of May, where we are now, round about the 1st of August, and round about the 1st of November, or at least the night going into the 1st of November, which is 31st of October, which is Halloween. So these dates all have kind of occult significances, and they mean a lot to different belief systems and different religious traditions. And a lot of them are linked to the idea of sacrifice. So this 40-day period that we're just coming out of, running from 22nd of March onwards, is known as an occult season of sacrifice. I did a radio show with Mark Passio a couple of weeks ago where he was breaking this whole thing down, and he was pointing out that in the modern world today, we still have dark occultists who observe these traditions and still abide by these ritualistic ceremonies that go with them, which unfortunately includes the idea of human sacrifice to the sun and to these other deities that these occultists worship. And, unfortunately, these are the people that are at the very helm of things like the entertainment industry and the world of business, the world of politics, all these different aspects of our daily lives. As I'm sure won't be a surprise to many of your listeners, the world is not run by the people we think it is. You've got all these shadow groups and networks and individuals tied to secret societies and these occult belief systems, this dark priest class of practitioners who are pulling all the strings. And that's as prevalent in the music industry as it is anywhere else. So the idea is that during this very important period leading into the second part of spring, these occultists feel the need to offer the odd sacrifice or two. And every now and again, besides other unfortunate victims that would appear to fall foul of this, it does involve the odd celebrity. That's as the theory goes. So just recently during this period, this 40-day period, we had the announced death of the electronic dance music DJ and producer Avicii, and he's said to have died on the 20th of April. The period around the 20th of April is very interesting in its own right because there have been many significant world events which have occurred at this time, particularly in recent years, going back over the last 20 years or so. We've had events such as the Columbine High School massacre, the siege and burning of the compound at Waco, Texas, the Oklahoma City bombing, the Deepwater Horizon event in the Gulf of Mexico where people died and that whole area was polluted by the oil spill. These all occurred round about the 20th of April. We also had the rapper Guru of the group Gangstar, who died on the 19th of April 2010 in some very strange and very dark circumstances. It's very tragic to me that so few people seem to remember Guru because he was a great artist and he put out some really empowering and conscious music over the years, but hardly anyone talks about the strange circumstances in which he died. And a lot of it seems to be linked to this guy Solar, this guy known as super producer Solar, who he was working with at the time, and who shows all the signs of being some kind of mind control handler of his and having had a very dark hold over his life. There's many different aspects to that, but a lot of people that looked into this at the time seem to think that Solar was practicing some kind of occult ritual on Guru, which resulted in his last days being very, dark. We can put some more detail on it, but that was the 19th of April 2010. If you cast your mind back 2 years to the 21st of April 2016, we had the announced death of Prince, of course, and this coincided with the Queen's 90th birthday. Then this year we get the announced death of Avicii, 20th of April, 3 days before the birth of Prince Louis of Cambridge, the latest child of William and Kate. Don't know if that's connected at all. It may well not be, but as you always get in such situations, loads of people leap onto these kind of announcements and make all kinds of proclamations and claims as to what's going on. So whenever you get a major celebrity passing away, you always get these claims and these counterclaims from various people. And what you hear is, on the one hand, oh, well, it happened just as we're told it did. People do die. Avicii, for instance, was very ill. He had a catalogue of medical problems. We shouldn't be too surprised that he passed away. These things happen. Somebody else will then counter that and say, well, no, we're in this season of sacrifice. We've seen this kind of thing before. The industry is run by occultists. They do these rituals and they take out one of their own from time to time. That's what's happening here. Then you'll get somebody else saying, no, actually, none of these artists ever really die. It's all a hoax, and they just retire the public persona and they go off to live out the rest of their days somewhere on an island or in some kind of witness protection program, and they're all having a big laugh at us. It's all a big hoax. So as a researcher and a truth seeker trying to make sense of all of this, you've got all these different possibilities which enter the equation, and you have to try and use your discernment and whatever evidence is at your disposal to try and figure out the truth of the matter. And you really do get it with everyone, Kev. I mean, with David Bowie, there was all kinds of theories as to what was going on. Same way with Prince, same way with Michael Jackson, Chris Cornell, Chester Bennington, And so we've got this with Avicii.
The same as I experience it as well, Mark. And, I cover so many topics. And the one that really leaves me banging my head is anytime anything happens in the world, it takes seconds for somebody to type, right, this is it, another false flag. Yeah. And like you say, you get the other crowd come in, no, everything's real. And again, you get the whole crisis actors, everyone's crisis actors, they're all laughing at us. So, I mean, it's almost like the modern minefield of the internet and social media, or anti-social media, as I call it. I prefer to take the article somebody shared, Mark, take it away and, really, really try and understand it. Try and get to that deeper meaning of it. Listen to my gut almost before I look at what anyone else has said.
Well, I'm very suspicious of anyone that comes out, particularly straight away after an event, and claims they've got it all figured out. And they're the ultimate word on it, and they know what happened. And if you don't believe them, you're some kind of idiot. So anyone that can be that sure about something is either operating to some kind of agenda, or their ego is absolutely out of control on steroids. I'm not 100% certain of many things, and I can't come out and make that kind of proclamation that this is what happened in this situation and it's 100% fact. There's a few instances where I'm able to say that with some confidence, but for the most part, with the type of work I do, I just don't know. The truth is, there are many different possibilities as to what's gone on with a particular situation, and we can weigh them all up. We can go with our best guess and our instinct, but I would never be so bold as to say I've got it all worked out in the majority of situations. And certainly when it comes to the announced passing away of celebrities, I don't know how you can be 100% certain of which of these events, which of these options is true, unless you were actually a part of that event, unless you were in that inner circle and you were involved in it in some way. That is the only way in which you can be that certain.
Absolutely. And, I imagine that, like me, you've probably got a checklist of little red flags, little indicators that you do look for to see whether this is something worth pursuing. And when I heard about Avicii's passing, it was almost looking through the cracks in my fingers, because I honestly believed that we would probably find that Avicii was 27 years old. And that's like a red flag when it comes to music industry deaths, Mark. But thankfully, he was 28, I believe, right?
Well, that's right. Yeah, I was kind of expecting him to have been the latest member of the 27 Club as well, because there's not been one for a while. I think the last one was Amy Winehouse, who died in 2011 at the age of 27. So as people probably know, there's been this long list in music history of artists that have passed away at the age of 27 in some strange circumstance or other. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Kurt Cobain, Pigpen of the Grateful Dead, Amy Winehouse, many, many others. Maybe people are getting onto this too much. Maybe it's becoming a bit too obvious. And so they've had to take a break on getting rid of them at 27. So Avicii passed away at 28, whatever the circumstances are. But there is an assortment of red flags, and there's a bunch of clues and indicators and strange aspects. There always are. So it's a case of getting on some Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot type-ish with all this stuff, and trying to piece it all together. So we can certainly look at some of the strange elements, some of the contradictions, some of the anomalies surrounding this one. So as I already mentioned, he died on the 20th of April, which is in the middle of this period of occult sacrifice. So that's the first interesting element of it. The guy's name was Tim Bergling. That was his real name. He was Swedish, and he was born 8th of September 1989. He took the name Avicii from the Buddhist tradition, actually, and the explanation of what it means here says Avicii, which is spelt differently to the way he chose to render it. So Avicii, the artist, put his name as Avicii, But in the Buddhist tradition, it was spelt in various different ways. The most common way seems to be Avichi. It's said to be the lowest level of the Naraka or hell realm into which the dead who have committed grave misdeeds may be reborn. It's said to be a cube buried deep underneath the divine earth. Avicii is often translated into English as interminable or incessant due to the idea that those beings that have been sent there languish there eternally. So not too light and fluffy and not particularly heartwarming.
Not the kind of name that you would associate with the character that Avicii was. This is amazing. We're on the break. We'll come right back. We'll be getting more from Mark Devlin. Check out his newest book, Musical Truth 2. More to come. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Mark Devlin is my very special guest on tonight's Kev Baker Show, right here on tfrlive.com. Please, I urge you all, go and check out markdevlin.co.uk. His latest book in the Musical Truth series, it was released in February, Musical Truth Volume 2. I was joking with Mark before the show that, you know, this is the kind of topic that just keeps on giving. And Mark, you were even saying to me, you could probably write one of these books every year because there's just so much to get into when it comes to all of this stuff.
Well, that's right. You know, there could be so many volumes of Musical Truth for however many years I've got left on this plane. You know, I'm not sure I want to be that guy that keeps on putting these out. I don't really want there to be a Musical Truth Volume 73. Not that I'll probably be lucky to live enough that long enough. But yeah, there's never any shortage of information to put out, and it seems there's always new stories to keep you on track. But really, I don't want to be doing this forever. I don't want to be letting people know how messed up this industry is and how it's all about mind control and social engineering and stuff, because there comes a point where you get it, or you're supposed to get it. You don't really need the detail to be continually piled on it. Once you've got it, now you have to start taking some action and doing something with it. And I use the information I put out as a wake-up call for people. In many ways, it's entry-level material to alert people to the fact that this world is not what we thought it was. And if you have these organizations, these networks, these entities controlling the music industry, well, then they're going to be controlling everything else, aren't they? Because they're not going to have left the world of politics alone, and the world of academia, and the world of science, and the world of the military and big business and everything else.
This entry-level information, a brilliant way of putting it. And that's what I love about this show and the work that you do, because it doesn't matter if people are aware of any of the topics that I cover here on the show, or any of the alternative media, any of that stuff. You know, something like Avicii that happened just recently. I mean, you can get into the conversation there, start introducing aspects of your work that really kind of bring down the barriers. And from there, that entry level, you can start to give them the bigger picture, because if you start slapping them about the face with some depopulation agenda right off the bat, people are going to run the other direction, man.
Well, that's right. So, you know, it's entry-level material, but there does come a point where you have to progress onto the next level, which is people taking some personal responsibility. I don't want people to just absorb all this information. It might be titillating to start with. It might be captivating. It might be fascinating. But as I say, there comes a point where you have to say, okay, I get it now. I understand. Now, what are we going to do with this? How do we collectively take personal responsibility to take back some of our power and understand that we're being controlled by a ridiculously small number of people and groups in all these aspects of our lives? So if I can alert people to that by talking about some artist names that are going to make their ears prick up, whether it's Jay-Z, Beyonce, the Beatles, The Doors, David Bowie, or Avicii, then that's the job that I'm trying to do. There'll be people that can be brought into this whole arena now of truth and conspiracy information by the death of Avicii. Maybe they were big fans of him, big fans of the electronic dance music genre. Maybe they've never looked at any kind of conspiratorial material before, but they're going to now, and Avicii is the catalyst for that. Maybe somebody else might have been brought into it by the death of Chris Cornell or Chester Bennington. But whatever the situation, I'm happy to use these situations to wake people's minds up in the hope that they can then be moved on to other things they need to look at, and particularly engaged in some kind of personal activism to turn these situations around. Because we could talk about these problems and these situations we face for months or years, but at what point are we going to collectively decide to do something about it? Just wanted to make that point. But we can go back to Avicii and some of the stuff surrounding him. So we've got the origins of his name, which is interesting in itself. We've got the circumstances in which he turned up dead. So it's very well known that he suffered a catalogue of health issues. So he had acute pancreatitis at one point. He's said to have had his gallbladder and appendix forcibly removed. There's been an implication that heavy drinking is what led to many of these conditions. And this was the result of the pressures that he felt through becoming famous so young and so quickly. And that's certainly something that happened. So he started making music at the age of 16. And by the age of, in his early 20s, he'd become a worldwide phenomenon, an absolute megastar in this scene. He put out his single Levels, which is what really put him on the map. And he got right up there with electronic dance music royalty, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Tiesto and David Guetta and, Carl Cox and Swedish House Mafia, Steve Aoki, all these other big names. It puts me in mind very much of the rapid rise to success of Martin Garrix, a Dutch DJ and producer. He put out his single Animals at the age of 16 and became absolutely massive, became the number one electronic dance music DJ and producer overnight, topping all these DJ polls at the age of 16. That absolutely smacks to me of an engineered career, because no 16-year-old gets that lucky just through working really hard, learning their craft, putting out a few tunes and crossing their fingers for good luck. So, Avicii's rise to fame and fortune and prominence was very reminiscent of that. When it comes to the whole EDM genre, so many of these stars seem to come out of Sweden or the Netherlands. It seems to be one of these two places. Looking at some of the very prominent Dutch stars, besides Martin Garrix, we have Tiesto and Armin van Buuren. And I relate a story in my new book of how both of these characters were hobnobbing with the Dutch royal family for a time. So I say Tiesto was appointed Officer of the Order of Orange Nassau, which is the former name for the Netherlands Order of Chivalry, by Queen Beatrix of Holland in 2004. Fellow Dutch DJ Chucky, there's another one, who originally hails from Suriname, was made a commander in the Order of the Yellow Star by that nation's president. Another Dutchman, Armin van Buuren, was hired to perform at the 2013 coronation of Willem-Alexander, the King of the Netherlands, with the royal family appearing on stage to shake hands with him.
Well, these are DJs. And I think this is really important, because people out there in America and things, they might be wondering about these honours. And, these are really influential characters then, Mark. And yet, DJs on the surface, you wouldn't think really that they're doing the work of the elites. But this is a real insight into the fact that they're getting rewarded for whatever it is they're doing.
The role of the DJ has changed so much over the past 30 years. You now think of DJs as these messianic figures that are up there at a DJ booth that resemble some kind of religious altar. And they play these huge events with tens or hundreds of thousands of people in attendance at some of these festivals. And all the DJ's got to do is hold out their hands in a Christ-like crucifixion pose. And the whole crowd just goes crazy. And they can make a hand signal to the crowd or start clapping their hands, and hundreds of thousands of people will follow their movements and in unison mimic what that character is doing. So they're really like religious figures presiding over these throngs of worshippers. And that has really changed, because as little as 30 years ago, DJs were just blokes that played records. And before the whole acid house scene kicked off, and again, I'll go into that big time in my new book, talking about how the UK acid house scene, which kicked off in late 1987 and 88, 30 years ago, was known as the second summer of love. It really changed clubbing culture. It really changed people's perceptions of dance music and DJs and weekend socializing rituals. But prior to 87, DJs were just blokes in pubs and community centres and, you know, small clubs that just played records and did Miss Wet T-shirt competitions and naff stuff like that. And now we have them as these religious kind of icons. And British DJs are starting to get MBEs and OBEs now. This is an incredible thing. So Pete Tong, BBC asset that's been on Radio 1 for the last 27 years, picked up an MBE the other year, presented by Prince William. Jazzy B of Soul to Soul is an MBE. Norman J, DJ out of London, famous for his Good Times sound system at Notting Hill Carnival, is an MBE. Goldie, the drum and bass DJ and producer, is an MBE. And David Rodigan, the reggae legend, who started out as an actor and is the son of a military officer, which is something we see time and time again, is also an MBE. So all these British DJs are starting to get these accolades from royalty. We got those examples of the Dutch DJs getting those accolades from the royalty of their land. And now we've got this story of Avicii, who, after this catalogue of health problems and all these medical issues that he's had, turned up dead in Muscat, Oman. It was originally reported that he was in a hotel room. He turned up dead in a hotel room, which is a very common factor with many artists. But it wasn't a hotel room. It turns out he was staying in an apartment, a converted farmhouse that's been made into a luxury apartment that was owned by a relative of the Sultan of Oman. So that's the royal family of that particular land. And he's said to have been out there holidaying and trying to recuperate in his health. And he just turned up dead. So initially, when these reports emerged, the public was left wondering what the hell had happened. Was it as a result of his health conditions? Had he overdosed on fentanyl or something like Prince and all these other artists had? There now seems to be this very strong implication that he took his own life. So his family put out an open letter in which they spoke of him. They said he could not go on any longer and he wanted peace. So it's using quite ambiguous language, but it certainly seems to be implying that he decided to take his own life. And we often get this, Kev, when you get the announced death of an artist, it's left very open to interpretation in terms of what happened. If you ask the average person, how did Prince actually die? How did Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston actually die? You know, how did Dolores O'Riordan of the Cranberries, who we can get onto, actually die? Most people might have this vague idea that, oh, it was something to do with an overdose or something, wasn't it? Or was it medication? Or had they done some recreational drugs or something? People never seem to remember the exact cause of death. How did Jim Morrison of the Doors die? You know, what was that? Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, how did these people actually die? And a lot of it is just put down to, oh, well, it's the rock and roll lifestyle, I suppose. You know, these people live these fast, crazy lives and drugs are everywhere and alcohol and all these crazy things that they do. So it's not surprising that a few of them turn up dead from time to time. It's something that can be got away with when it comes to musicians that you wouldn't get away with other professions. So if a bunch of plumbers or lorry drivers were turning up dead, people would be saying, why are all these plumbers dying? What is it? What's causing this? But with musicians, people just seem to be content to chalk it up to, oh, well, you know, it's what happens in these industries, isn't it? So we're left not really knowing what happened to Avicii. And this, of course, is what fuels all these rumors. Did he fake his death? Was it really suicide? Did they do away with him? Was it some form of sacrifice to the industry? You know, or did he just die of bad health problems? We don't really know.
Exactly. And without being there, like you said earlier, we just can never really definitively know. And that's why it's good to lay out the kind of clues that you come across, Mark, and let people come to their own conclusions. But you mentioned one in there, the Cranberries. I mean, that's been going on a little while now, and we're still no nearer the truth as to what happened to that girl.
Well, that's right. So Dolores O'Riordan turned up dead in a hotel room, which was, I think it was the Hilton on Park Lane, right near Hyde Park in London, in January of this year. Initially, we got the report from the police that they were not treating it as suspicious and there was no evidence of foul play. And actually, that's what was said about Avicii when his death was first announced. So the police out there in Oman were saying, oh, there's no reason to think there was any foul play going on here. So suicide is not foul play now then, if that's what's being hinted at. But Dolores O'Riordan, again, there just seems to be this implication that she maybe overdosed on some prescription drugs or maybe recreational drugs or whatever it was. So there was a coroner's report that was due on her to be delivered on the 3rd of April. And back in January, this seemed very strange that we were going to be made to wait so long to get some detail of what had happened. And people were saying, well, why is it taking so long? So the 3rd of April came and went, and we're now told that the coroner's report has been put on hold indefinitely. We now don't know when we're going to get that or if it's going to be made public at all. And yet they're still maintaining there's no evidence of foul play and there's nothing suspicious about it. Death by hotel room.
Well, that just doesn't make sense. So that almost contradicts each other, right?
It doesn't make any sense. And of course, what's going to happen is the whole thing is just going to fizzle out. And people are going to forget all about it. Most people have probably forgotten about Dolores O'Riordan already. We got the news in January and people would have been tutting about it and saying, oh, isn't that terrible? I remember that girl from those nice songs, Linger and Zombie and stuff. And then she'll just fade out of their memory. And by the time this coroner's report ever appears, if it does, people would have forgotten all about her. And then you could ask people in 5 years, do you remember Dolores O'Riordan? Oh, yeah, didn't she die in a hotel room or something? Didn't she overdose on some drugs, was it? Or what was it? You know, did she drown in the bath or something? And people's memory would just go hazy like that.
Yeah, I'd never thought about this, but when you were first saying that there about how over time, you know, we kind of can't remember what happened to stars, and you rattled off a couple of names, and I was trying to remember what actually happened to them. And you're right. I'd never thought about that before, but it does become hazy. And we do write it off to just part of the lifestyle, part of their legend, right?
That's right. And other deaths by hotel room include Whitney Houston, Janis Joplin, Chris Cornell, and Michael Hutchence. So Michael Hutchence turned up dead in a Sydney hotel room in November 1997 in very strange circumstances. That one was put down to suicide. He was found with a belt round his neck tied to the door. But he also had a broken hand. So how does that work? And there was also reports from witnesses in the hotel of a disturbance taking place in his room and all kinds of bumping about and stuff and, you know, strange noises coming from his room before that, which is also a story we got about Amy Winehouse, who turned up dead in her apartment. Witnesses there said they heard signs of a disturbance and loud voices and stuff like that. None of it ever adds up. So, you know,
when
Chris
it came to Winehouse, right? Maybe this is just me, but it was almost like her dad was her handler. He was in every photograph, every single video, near enough. He was always lurking in the shadows, man.
Well, it did come across that way, yeah. He's just supposed to be this regular London cabbie, but he sure did milk the limelight in the wake of his daughter's death. He was doing all these interviews and he almost became a star in his own right, you know, and he never seemed to be that cut up about it. I never saw him weeping for the memory of his daughter in the same way that the rest of us, I'm sure, would.
What a talented lady, you know, and, you know, maybe it's just me, but it definitely seemed weird. He really was weird.
Well, yeah, it's just one of so many weird things. So you get stories like Chris Cornell. His wife, Vicky, made a statement after his death was announced. He turned up dead in a hotel room in Detroit the night after, or the same night as having done a gig. So he finished his gig, went back to the hotel room. Next thing you know, he's dead. And his wife said, oh, I spoke to him that night and he seemed in good spirits and he was making plans for the future. But she then went on to make another statement implying that he was depressed. He'd got a history of depression and, you know, maybe that was a factor in it. But we get the same thing with Dolores O'Riordan. So there's people saying, oh, she was making plans for the future. She had these musical collaborations on the card. She got these social plans to meet with friends, you know. So she didn't strike you as someone that was in a position to take her own life, that was ready to do that. Another interesting thing about Dolores O'Riordan is she spoke very openly about having been sexually abused at a very young age. She's given interviews where she's spoken in very graphic detail about somebody very close to the family. She's not revealed who that was. It doesn't seem to be her father, because she's spoken about her father in interviews in, quite respectful terms. So we don't know who this individual was that abused her, but this is something we hear time and time again from celebrities as well. They're all sexually abused as kids. Chester Bennington spoke of this as well, the singer with Linkin Park, who turned up dead 2 months after Chris Cornell and was connected to Chris Cornell in many ways. All kinds of theories there as to what was going on. But Chester Bennington spoke of having been sexually abused as a kid, and I think Chris Cornell spoke of something similar as well. So this seems to be a very common factor in many of these artists' lives. Something that a lot of people think may link Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington, who died last year, with Avicii, is this idea that all of them were in some way trying to issue a warning to the public or a revelation as to elite paedophile rings and child trafficking that goes on at very senior levels. So this brings us back to the video to Avicii's song For a Better Day. Have you seen this one yourself, Kev?
No, I have not, Mark.
Right. Well, it started doing the rounds again. It's getting shared quite widely. It came out in 2015, so not a new video by any means, but it's quite shocking and disturbing on any level. And I've seen some stuff, but this is, quite shocking to me. It's very hard hitting. It's quite difficult to comprehend how this was passed for mainstream public viewing, and how somebody signed it off and said, yep, that's fine, we'll get that out on the TV networks. The song bears no relation to what's being depicted in the video. So the video puts me in mind of this movie that came out in 1996 called Sleepers. It starred Kevin Bacon, and Robert De Niro was in it as well. And it was the story of a bunch of young boys that get sent to a young offenders institute, and they get abused, sexually abused and beaten and assaulted and stuff by these guards in this facility. And one of them is Kevin Bacon, the Kevin Bacon character. And when they get out of this facility and they're all grown up, they go after their abusers and they try and make them pay for their actions. So in this Avicii video, you've got, first of all, this truck that pulls up in the middle of nowhere in this wilderness. And there's all these unsavory looking guys waiting around, all twitchy and nervous. Some of them are licking their lips in anticipation. And they open up the back of this truck and it's full of kids. And of course, it's given you a depiction of child trafficking and these kids being taken off for abuse by these so-called elite paedophile rings. You see a couple of kids running away from their would-be attackers through this field of crops. And they reach the edge of the field and they're at a cliff edge. And rather than allow themselves to be recaptured, they jump off the edge of the cliff because that's preferable to them. Then the video fast forwards a number of years to where you've got a couple of what were obviously these abused kids, and they're now grown up, they're now adults, and they've decided to go after those that abused them and make them pay. So they track them down and they very brutally beat them in very graphic detail. And as part of what they do to them, they've got this hot iron, this like welding iron, and they heat up this piece of iron and they brand them before they kill them. So they're branding them as, rapists or whatever. And one of the individuals that they go after is a prominent politician, and they end up hanging him in front of this group of people from the balcony of his building. So, it's the idea of kids that have been abused taking revenge on their attackers. And a lot of people have interpreted this as, oh, well, it's Avicii's way of letting us know what's going on and trying to alert the public to it. But I wonder if that's what it really is. So, first of all, a video on that scale, which is very professionally made, would have involved a lot of people. It's not just a personal statement from Avicii himself. He's said to have co-directed it with this filmmaker, Levan, God, I can't pronounce this name, it's Hungarian, Tisikurivili or something like that. This is a dude that made a documentary on Avicii's life that was completed in 2017. And it documented all these battles with his health that he'd had. And part of the documentary was filmed in Avicii's hospital bed, where he's talking about all the pressures of touring and how his rapid ascent to fame had made him ill. So anyway, this Levan guy is said to have co-directed this video For a Better Day. But it would have been a collaborative effort. So there would have been a number of people involved. It would have had to have been signed off at a senior level by executives within these corporations. So if it was just Avicii trying to make a personal statement, there's a number of other people involved that could have said, well, no, we're not going to let this get out. Absolutely not. This is not appropriate at all. So I'm not convinced that it was a personal statement from him about child trafficking and stuff. We also have to consider that the occultists that preside over these industries very much are into mockery. They like to mock us profane ones and rub our noses in it by giving us depictions of stuff that goes on in the knowledge that the vast majority of people seeing it will not understand what's being communicated. And even if they did, they wouldn't be in a position to do anything about it. So it's kind of revelation of the method where they feel the need to give you an indication of what they're doing so that we can't say we weren't told. But at the same time, like I say, they know that it will go over the heads of most people seeing it. Then another thing to factor in is what I talk about in my new book as a disarmament tactic. And this is where they give you the impression that a certain public figure, whether it's an artist or a consciousness guru or a business leader or whatever, is on our side and is one of us, because they appear to be making statements that articulate what the rest of us are thinking, and they kind of resonate with us. We find familiarity in what they're saying. They say all the right things. A good example of that would be Russell Brand, the other year.
I was just going to see him.
Yeah. Well, that's what everyone was saying when he emerged the other year with all his BS about we need a revolution of consciousness and a more egalitarian society and all this, Marxist, socialist, bloody
Tavistock.
Tavistock engineered propaganda that he was putting out. What people commented at the time was, well, so much of what he says makes sense. He's saying all the right things. Yes, because that's a common tactic. That's what they do. They make them say all the right things, so you think they're one of us and on our side.
Absolutely brilliant. Mark Devlin will be back after the break.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Mark Devlin is my very special guest tonight, right here on the Kev Baker Show. And we're moving into hour number 2 now. That first hour just went by so quickly. So much great information. And like I was saying, Mark's taken so much time and put in so much effort to not only research all of this, but then to connect all of these dots as well. Please check out markdevlin.co.uk. And of course, he's just released a couple of months ago, Musical Truth 2. And this covers the dark forces and some of the more kind of topics that your favourite artists wouldn't rather have you know about. I urge you all to check that out. And tonight we've been talking about Beltane and the season of sacrifice. And just recently, the music industry lost a very big and influential global star, a modern star in Avicii. I'm still trying to get over the Buddhist meaning to Avicii's name. Little did I know. But Mark, we're going to summarise this and then we're going to move off into other topics because there's so much for us to get into tonight. But your final thoughts on Avicii, sir?
If I had to hazard a guess, and we were talking in the first hour about how whenever an artist passes away, you get these different options. It was a hoax. They died just as we're told they did. The industry took them out. There was foul play afoot. This is only my personal opinion, and it's a guess. So this is not me stating that this is the gospel truth that everyone should embrace. But my feeling about it is that he was probably taken out because I think they do this from time to time, and they can do it with favorites, chosen ones that have served them well in their agenda up to that point. So we were talking about this video for a better day and how it appears to be Avicii exposing what goes on with child trafficking rings and elite paedophile groups. But there's no way that video would have got out if those that control him didn't want it to get out. So there would have been a reason why it got out into the public domain like that. Because look at Avicii's career trajectory. He became very famous very quickly, very young. And whenever that happens, that's an engineered career. That's a career that's been given to that person. It's fame and fortune that has been created by those that can make these things happen. Nobody gets into that kind of position unless they're serving the control system in some kind of way and are an asset to some kind of social engineering or culture creation or mind control agenda. There are no exceptions to that. That's a sweeping statement. That's something I'm coming right out and saying because I've done enough research now to know how this dynamic works. You don't get one or two that just slip through the net. You get a few that start to become successful in their own right, and they exhibit some skill and talent. And that will be the point where somebody representing the controllers of the industry will step in and offer them a contract to elevate them a few more rungs up the ladder, you know. So that's certainly how some of these artists' careers start out. But nobody enjoys that level of meteoric success that the likes of Avicii and Martin Garrix and Tiesto and all these other EDM stars do without doing some kind of work for the system. Social engineering is everywhere. In the new book, I go into what the electronic dance music scene worldwide is now being used for, which in a nutshell is normalizing and making acceptable ideas of artificial intelligence and futurist transhumanist societies, which is what we're heading into. Getting people ready, young people particularly, very impressionable young people whose minds are very easy to shape and mold, getting them to revere technology and getting them ready for this smart grid Internet of Things, which they want to roll out. If you can get an entire youthful generation to embrace all that and think it's really cool and really great through subliminal ideas that have been implanted into their mind through the music that they listen to and the parties and festivals that they attend and the drugs that are rewiring the chemistry of their brains, then it's a job well done. It's just another tactic in the toolkit of the social engineers. That's what's been going on.
Absolutely. And, you know, this generation now, Mark, unlike ours, I mean, from the minute they've been born, they were born into this almost this smart grid, this world, this digital world that we all now find ourselves in. And they're able to get into the minds of these children younger and younger. And I'm really keen on you emphasizing just how much music can be used as a tool, a social engineering tool, and how there's historic evidence of this in the past, because this is the real important thing I want people to take away, aside from the kind of infotaining facts that we'll talk about on here, like the things surrounding Avicii's and others' deaths. The important message for people to really understand is the power of the actual music they're listening to and the real reasons what it's really been used for, because that's lost on a lot of people when they get into their favourite artists or their favourite bands. Yeah, they like that band, that artist, but do they really know what's going on?
Music's been used as mind control for centuries or millennia even, going back to ancient tribal traditions and communities. You know, ritual music and dance has been a big part of the lives of so many cultures around the world. And then going through the era of classical music, where it was all to do with compositional structure and tones and things like that. It's all to do with sound frequencies and what happens on an unseen level with, what goes into these recordings that can have such a powerful effect on the human mind and the human psyche and the rhythms of our body and all kinds of things. So sound can be used for healing, and very often is. There are therapy centers that specialize in using exposure to friendly, benevolent sound frequencies as a way of healing people of all kinds of medical conditions and bringing them out of persistent comas and things like that. But the opposite can also be true. There's duality everywhere in existence. So where there's good, there's the capacity, the opportunity for evil, if the will is there on the part of the practitioner. So if somebody is out to do you harm, then they've got a great toolkit at their disposal in terms of being able to use sound frequencies for that. Very dissonant, discordant sound frequencies. This brings in the whole 432 versus 440 hertz tuning pitch issue, which I think we probably discussed on a previous show. But yeah, music and sound can be used to control people. A comment that I got from somebody that emailed me a while back was, they said, they made a very astute observation that they think the controllers, the social engineers, have different scenes, different styles of music and different fashions, also different drugs that go hand in hand with the music and the different fashions, ready to roll out at different points in the timeline. So they judge when they feel it's appropriate to roll out a new trend, a new fad, a new movement. So in 1987, for example, the time was deemed right to unleash this thing called acid house. If you accept that it was co-opted from the start. You know, it's possible that it had slightly more organic beginnings, but it was certainly decided to steer it off in certain desired directions. Then this person was saying, well, you know, there's the whole drum and bass scene that kicked off in the 90s, and it would have been judged appropriate to bring that in at a certain point. Going back, you had punk and new wave emerging in the 70s, coming off the back of progressive rock, you know, seemingly as a backlash against that whole thing. And there's so much evidence to show that the punk scene was completely manipulated and contrived. I've got a big chapter in the new book on that as well. When you look into the backgrounds of some of the affiliations of the prominent punk musicians and producers and managers of the bands, there's absolutely no doubt that that was a control mechanism for social engineering once again. And then you can take it back to the 60s and psychedelic rock, the whole counterculture thing, which has been very well documented. So this person was making the point that for every generation and in every part of the world, really, because some of these things are rolled out in America, some of them come out in Britain. In the case of electronic dance music, a lot of that has come out of Holland and Sweden and other parts of Europe. They've just got all these different ways of controlling large numbers of people ready to go. And it's drugs in combination with fashion, social attitudes, and music styles. They always have their Pied Pipers. They always have their chosen leaders to kind of kickstart these scenes and be the flag wavers for it. So think of Britpop, for example, that whole thing, Cool Britannia in the mid-90s. That was completely manufactured. A lot of it was down to trying to win favour for Tony Blair's new Labour Party, when they were trying to get them elected in 1997 on the 1st of May, incidentally, that date again, which is when that whole ritual took place of Labour getting their election victory and all these hordes of people taken to the streets and celebrating. That was a big ritualistic ceremony that was going on that very important date of 1st of May. Just going back to the Avicii thing very briefly for a second, I've spoken to a couple of people in Sweden that have told me about the very strange and hugely influential atmosphere that took place in Stockholm when there was a big ceremony to mark the passing of Avicii and, you know, ostensibly celebrate his life. So they brought out 1,000 singers and thousands of people, tens of thousands of people took to the streets of Stockholm to mark this occasion and, you know, supposedly celebrate the life of Avicii. And these couple of people in Sweden said it must have been like this when Diana passed away, you know, in Britain in 1997. And there was this strange feeling that seemed to sweep up the whole nation because Avicii really was a big megastar in Sweden and, you know, a household name. So there seems to have been a ritualistic aspect to this event that was connected to his death, and that won't be insignificant. So, yeah, I was just talking about the Cool Britannia thing. You know, that's a very good example of social engineering and how an entire movement that seems to be organic and grassroots and to have come naturally, actually, with the passage of time, can be shown to have been completely manipulated. And the leaders of that whole scene were Blur and Oasis, you know, fronted by Damon Albarn and Noel Gallagher. Damon Albarn took an OBE the other year. So these things, MBEs, OBEs, are basically awards for services rendered. And it's often for services different to what we think. So we're told somebody like Damon Albarn gets an OBE for his contributions to music and culture, you know. But I think the truth of the matter is he's been doing different kinds of work. He played a very key role in that whole Britpop thing. And through his group Gorillaz, he's also been helping to normalize this transhumanist futurist society, because the Gorillaz appear as these digital holograms, you know. And he's made comments about how in the future they'll be able to put holograms up on stage at performances like Glastonbury, and they won't even need to turn up because the holograms can do the concert for them. So he's kind of getting you ready for an entirely technological digital society where that way of doing things becomes the norm. So in my view, he's a system cooperator. He's a game player who's been doing some work, you know, and got rewarded for it. Then you got Noel Gallagher, who attended that famous party with Tony Blair at Number 10 and is sipping champagne with him and stuff. Noel Gallagher was a close mate of Russell Brand. He appeared in an interview in the New Statesman, which is a publication coming out of the Fabian Society. It's all to do with cultural Marxism and socialism, which is what Brand was pushing. And Gallagher made a comment in that where he said he still admires Tony Blair, even after all these years. He's a great admirer of what he achieved. So he's another system game player. And a lot of people won't want to hear it because they'll put Noel Gallagher up on a pedestal. They'll think he's some kind of hero and cultural icon. But the truth of the matter is all these people have careers that have been manufactured for them. And if they're out there as a household name, if they're out there as an A-lister that you've heard of, and particularly if they're getting MBEs and OBEs, it's because they're not who you think they are. And their true mission, their true role in society lies somewhere outside of what you think they're all about. There are so many examples of this. And again, I've got a huge chapter on it in my book. And it's actually been the basis of my public talks in recent times as well, where I've spoken of lifetime actors. These people are lifetime actors.
Yeah, if we don't learn anything from one of the most infamous DJs ever, the story of Jimmy Savile, then more fool us, really, isn't it? Because, I mean, there we can see the perfect example of how these people may look one thing in public, but behind the scenes, they are doing something entirely different and usually more sinister. He got the highest accolade of them all, you know, Sir Jimmy.
Well, that's right. I'm just trying to pull up a comment here which has sprung to mind while you were talking about that. Let me see if I can find it, because in my chapter on lifetime actors and culture creation, I've included this great quote from Joe Atwill, who's the author and researcher that coined the phrase lifetime actors. And that is a reference to people that you think of as one thing. So they have a public persona as a musician or an actor or whatever the hell Russell Brand is. But the truth of the matter is that they're something quite different to what we're told. I'm just trying to find this quote, which is why I'm a bit distracted. But here it is. So I've included this quote that Joe Atwill made on a radio show. And he says, "The media's been weaponized. So when you get someone who's a star in the media, they're not there accidentally. When you see these elements fitting into the process of the weaponization, like the Beatles leading to the Stones, leading to the sex, drugs and rock and roll culture, you know they're somehow dirty, they're somehow in on the operation. Jim Morrison and the Doors. Now you've got the son of the admiral who led the false flag fake attack in the Gulf of Tonkin that starts the Vietnam War. Who is this guy? He comes out of nowhere. He's very attractive and he has this appetite for LSD. And because he's a music idol, he influences people. But imagine if he'd come out and said, you know, I'm just the son of military intelligence and they've told me they want to have people take drugs. So please take drugs. I mean, if he came out that way, the culture wouldn't move very far. His persona was developed. All the attributes of his character in the media were developed so that he would have the most power in terms of influencing people. And that's how it's done. There are so many examples of this. It doesn't just stop with Jim Morrison. They've been doing it forever.
That's one of the things that really kind of strikes me, because I spent 5 years, just under 5 years in the military, and it's the links to the military that you see throughout music, throughout time. This in itself should raise a red flag as to what it's been used for, Mark.
That's right. That's why I mentioned David Rodigan earlier, and the fact that his father was an army officer. Rodigan was born on an army military base in Germany before he came back over to England, and he attended school in Oxford, just very close to where I am. But the reason I mention that is because it's key to so many instances where people become famous in the public eye and are given some role or other. And the other thing about Rodigan, he's a very prominent reggae DJ, by the way. He's in his 60s now. He's been around for decades. He's been a very popular radio and club DJ on the reggae scene. He's a middle-class white guy, and he's the most unlikely candidate to have become a very prominent reggae DJ. He's been out to Jamaica. He's played in sound systems along with these real hardcore, born and bred reggae artists. And he's held his own in these sound systems, these sound clashes, and he's become highly respected by the community. But it also puts me in mind of Tim Westwood. Let's go there while we're talking about this stuff. You know, Tim Westwood is the most prominent hip hop DJ in the UK, has been for many years. He's someone that I used to look up to and respect. He was a big inspiration for me, but I see him in a different light now. I can see him for what he is. He's a lifetime actor. He's been given a role. His father was a bishop. He was an Anglican bishop of Peterborough and various other places. So not a military link there, but a establishment religious one. And Westwood studied under Rodigan for a time in his early years. You know, he kind of tutored him. Westwood was Rodigan's protege before he went out on his own. So you've got these two middle-class white guys that are the most prominent players in the hip-hop and reggae scenes, respectively. And they've been very influential in guiding how those scenes developed, how the music got accepted and played on the radio and in the clubs. And they've gained massive followings, each of them. And of course, each of those music genres has changed and evolved and mutated over the years, and they've been the figureheads and the Pied Pipers for it. So it seems to be just another example of how it gets done. They have their chosen ones, they get given these missions, given these roles. As you say, military backgrounds are so often the key to it, because it's the first thing I always look for. What did the father do? You can't always find the information, but often you can. And in so many cases, you find the father was in some way connected to the military or the military industrial complex, or they even have links to the intelligence services sometimes. Often they're doctors, pathologists or psychiatrists, and often that work has involved them in projects connected to the government or to something like Oxford and Cambridge universities, which basically is the government arms of it. So, yeah, it's military, career men, it's doctors, the occasional bishop or priest or whatever. But it becomes very interesting to see what the father did, because a lot of these people are selected for these roles and made to be public icons on the basis of their bloodlines and their families and their backgrounds.
Wow, just wow. And, one of the DJs that sticks in my mind from when I was growing up anyway, Mark, Pete Tong. You always heard about Pete Tong. He was one of the big ones, and he was really influential, I would imagine, in all of this, right?
Yeah, Pete Tong, another one that I used to look up to. He's a big inspiration for me as a radio DJ. I used to listen to him on Capital Radio back in the late 80s before he got onto Radio 1. And I looked up to the guy. But again, the facts speak for themselves. He's taken the MBE. He now lives in Los Angeles. He relocated there a few years ago. And Los Angeles has become the epicenter for this electronic dance music scene. The whole EDM thing really kicked off big time in the States, round about 2007, 2008. That's when you had a merging of these different styles, where you've got a lot of what had previously been thought of as hip-hop artists doing records with the likes of David Guetta and Swedish House Mafia and individuals like this, will.i.am, making records with Flo Rida and Pitbull, and David Guetta getting Kelly Rowland of Destiny's Child to sing on his records, and R&B singers like Akon and Neo doing all this hybrid sort of electronic dance music. So that was used to popularize electronic dance music with the American public. And as I say, it took place round about a decade ago. And once that whole thing kicked off, and it coincided with the popularization of Molly, as it became known. This is basically MDMA or ecstasy. So we've referred to it as or, ecstasy pills over here in the UK, but it became known as Molly, which is MDMA in its sort of pure state. And that became connected to this whole scene as well. So a few years after all that happened, you got a whole bunch of prominent DJs and producers going over to LA and relocating themselves there. And Pete Tong was one of them. And it's an indication of the fact that he is one of the leaders, one of the Pied Pipers of this scene. You know what? On his Twitter page, he actually refers to himself as the Pied Piper of dance. Those are his words.
We've seen the transfer of the Beatles from the UK to the US back in the day. And now we're seeing it from the UK to the US when it comes to this electronic dance scene. And I think this is kind of indicative of what's going on, right? Because what happens here musically, it's very important, and it's going to go global once it takes off, right? So it's important to watch just what they're programming us with. And, with the music today, Mark, it worries me. It really does, because more and more we're even seeing artificial intelligence being involved in the writing of music. And with the knowledge they have about the frequencies and everything else, who honestly knows what they're programming into the minds of people going to these mass rituals, also known as concerts?
Yeah, well, I can't stand to listen to any pop music now. And I just can't stand to have the radio on. If I do have the radio on, it has to be an oldies station. It has to be 70s and 80s stuff, because I can't stand to listen. Honestly, since the year 2000, Kev, there's just nothing in the mainstream that has impressed me. There are no bands, there are no soloists that I've really lapped up. I can think of maybe 4 or 5 songs since the year 2000 that have been big commercial hits that I've actually liked, that I would be keen to listen to again.
I'm exactly the same as you, and I'd hazard a guess. I'm 41, 42 soon. I would say we're about the same age, and same as you, man. I just can't take to modern music. I only found out about something called grime a couple of months ago. What the heck's grime? I've got no idea what's going on. My son looks at me like I'm some kind of dinosaur.
Yeah, well, grime, there's another story. Wiley is one of the main grime artists, has been since the start. And he picked up an MBE the other week as well. Same week as Ringo Starr, I think it was. So now we got grime artists starting to get these recognitions as well. But my observation about pop music, I'm a little bit older than you, but we're basically the same generation. It's tempting to think that you've just become a grizzled old miserable bastard that is out of touch with youth culture. But it's not that. It's not that. There's more to it than that, because so many people that I speak to of my generation, and even people that are slightly younger, say the same thing. They say pop music has been garbage, straight garbage, since at least 2000. And it's not you. You're just picking up on the fact that these songs have no foundation to them. There's no soul. There's no spirit to them. There's no message in the music. There's nothing profound about the lyrics. The sound frequencies, the production methods just don't make you feel good. They don't uplift you. They don't galvanize or motivate you in any way, in the way that music used to. And you can point to so many examples from previous decades. So it is an agenda. Pop songs are being written by mathematical algorithms and artificial intelligence. You've got computer programs determining what's going to make a catchy hook and just building it into the way these songs are written. You don't get artists writing songs for themselves anymore. There's the odd singer-songwriter, maybe Ed Sheeran and people like that. But for the most part, these pop puppets, these bubblegum pop artists that are lapped up by teenagers, they just get these songs given to them. I've heard stories of a song will be ready to go for somebody like Britney Spears, and then at the last minute they think, oh, you know what? Nah, we won't give it to Britney. We'll give it to Miley Cyrus instead. So they're just puppets that are just performing.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. One more segment with the brilliant Mark Devlin. Don't forget to check out the second book in his series, Musical Truth 2. You can head on over to markdevlin.co.uk. And before I forget, tomorrow night I'll be hanging out, I think, with Jimmy Jeans. I'll probably drag in Scotty Lopez, and we're going to be looking at the gaming industry. and how it influences every aspect of our lives today. And the AI is going to feature highly on that show as well. And to round off the week, Bill Bain, the exorcist, he's coming back on Thursday to catch us up with all of those creepy stories that he always brings. But back to Mark tonight. And Mark, before we get back into this, you do a ton of public speaking. Any conferences or anything coming up on the horizon that people can hopefully go and see you talking about all of this stuff?
Well, I've done a bunch already this year. I did the Truth Mind Reality Conference in Phoenix in March, which was great. That's a new event that went really well. I also did a bookstore event in LA, and I've been doing a bunch of UK ones as well. So I've touched London so far, Birmingham, Hull. I was at New Horizons at St Anne's just last week. The video to that went online today, actually. That's a great one as well. Upcoming, I've got a conference in Oxford, believe it or not. This is of great amusement to me because Oxford is a breeding ground for the elite establishment, of course. It's where all the bloody politicians and the oligarchs go to get their training. So I love the delicious irony of the fact that my mate Ben Emlyn Jones is putting on an event called Dreaming Saucers. So I'm not so much into the whole UFO alien thing myself, but some of the speakers are going to be talking about that. Dreaming Saucers is wordplay because Oxford is known as the city of dreaming spires. So he's just put a little twist on it there. But I've been invited. Yeah,
Ben's a regular guest. We get him on once a month here. Such a brilliant guy. Met him physically at a UFO conference. And like you, I mean, I just can't speak highly enough of Ben. And I hope that conference goes really well, man.
Yeah, thanks. Ben is a great guy. I went up to see Richard D. Hall in Birmingham last week with him, and we were sharing a car ride together, and he's just such a wealth of knowledge. He just knows so much, and he just reels it all off the top of his head, no notes necessary. So, yeah, props to Ben. He's putting that on. I'm doing a talk there on Sunday, 13th of May. Then I'm doing Truth Juice in Leicester the following Saturday, 19th of May. That's a daytime event in the afternoon. I've got one in Bristol, Truth Juice Bristol, 25th of July. I'm doing the Open Minds Ireland conference in November. That's now been rescheduled for the second weekend in November. It was supposed to take place in March, but the beast from the east shut it down. Severe weather. So that's now in November. I'm doing Open Mind in Copenhagen, if anyone's in that part of the world, in September. And I'm probably going to be putting a few more into the diary as well, but none up north. So far, I've done a few up north this year. I'm just waiting to put a few more in the diary.
Oh, you don't want to come up here, man. We're all choking to get out of this place. This is like a globalist wonderland north of the border these days, Mark. Don't come anywhere. Yeah. It's terrible. But no, all joking aside, one of the pitfalls, I imagine, in doing the work that you do, I mean, although music brings us all together, right? I mean, for some people, you're destroying their dreams, or should I say, their illusions about some of these stars that you talk about. And you point out some of the facts that these people would rather never come to the surface. And that's where we're going to pick up here, isn't it, really? Because you look on social media, and it's no exaggeration to say that some of these artists, be it Beyonce, Jay-Z, that they're two of the easiest ones to go for, your Rihanna's, they're literally idolized, Mark. They truly are.
And I'm all out of apologizing for exposing these people now. I used to kind of put caveats and disclaimers in there and say, look, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just communicating information. If I expose your particular holy cow or say something about an artist that you greatly admire, hey, I'm just giving you information. I can't even be bothered to apologize for it now because it is what it is. The facts speak for themselves.
Apologize, man. Nor should you apologize, because all you're doing is you're looking beneath the surface and you're just sharing what you find.
That's right. It's an unpopular job. Not many people would want to be doing it. Not many people would want to be telling others that somebody they've put up on a pedestal for the last 20 or 30 years and somebody that they have greatly admired. You've got budding musicians who worship maybe the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Who or the Doors, and have done for the last 30 or 40 years. their music has influenced their own style, their own very way of seeing the world and expressing themselves. The last thing they want to hear is that these groups came out of military intelligence operations and there's stuff you need to know about them to suggest they're not who you thought they were. They didn't evolve organically. They didn't get to those prominent positions under their own steam. They were given a helping hand in line with certain agendas that they were a part of. People don't want to hear that, and I get it. But I've been through that myself. I've had DJ heroes, right? As a radio and club DJ myself, there are certain people that I've looked up to. We've mentioned some names today. And I've had to accept that these people didn't get there through hard work under their own steam. I can now see that. And it's very difficult to come to terms with. They're not who I thought they were. I can no longer view them as heroes. And this is the point. We need to stop having heroes. When you have heroes, you externalize your own power and you give it away. You're failing to focus on your own sovereign nature as a free individual, free to express yourself in your own way and free to shape your own reality. You're spending too much time and energy and attention on these other people that are given to you. They're served up to you. You don't really know who they are. You're given the public version of them, the Wikipedia version of them. You think you know who Mick Jagger is. You think you know who Rod Stewart or Tom Jones is or Paul McCartney. Nobody knows who Paul McCartney is. But you really think these people live their lives the way you see them when they're on stage or in an interview or whatever, when that camera stops turning, when they step off that stage, you really think they're that same person? What you're getting is a glossy public relations version of them. And the real flesh and blood individual, the reality of who they are, is going to be very different to the way that you perceive them, the way that you've been trained and conditioned to perceive them. There's somebody very different outside of the spotlight. And when you do some digging into the background and you find affiliations like secret societies and links to the CIA, links to Skull and Bones, links to Oxford and Cambridge universities, the London School of Economics, which is where Mick Jagger came out of, these things speak for themselves. You find artists that are into the works of Aleister Crowley or the OTO or the Church of Satan and these different mystery school secret societies. And you're starting to get an indication then of what these people are really all about and why they've been put into the public eye, why they've been handed that kind of career. You think somebody like Mick Jagger, Elton John, Cliff Richard, Bob Dylan, that have had careers lasting decades, would have been allowed to achieve that all by themselves if they weren't chosen ones, if they weren't serving the control system that we have in some way. There's no way you'd be allowed to achieve that kind of career. So anyone that has been in the public eye that long and has that level of influence on people and has that level of fan worship has been handed that. You made a comment about how people revere these people to ridiculous degrees. You get that in the electronic dance music scene, to take it back to that. When you look at the Facebook pages of people like Paul van Dyk or Tiesto or David Guetta, you literally get comments like, "I worship you, you are my God." These are the actual words that people use. "You are my God, I hang on your every word, I follow your every move. If only I could just touch your hand just once, it would change my life." These are the things that people say. This is the level of mind control that they're under by these icons that have been given to them, that they think they know, but really they don't. And all the time, the culture creators and the social engineers that create these people must be just laughing at a job well done, because they've got the minds and the hearts and the souls and the consciousness of huge numbers of people that are giving away their power to these trends, fads, movements, scenes, false heroes and role models. This is actually a tactic in political subversion, the creation of false heroes and role models. Richard D. Hall talks about this. There was a former KGB guy that became a whistleblower, and he started talking about some of the tactics that agency had used to covertly infiltrate other nations. And one of the tactics right up there at the top of the list was the creation of false heroes and role models. where they insert their chosen ones into prominent positions in culture, in entertainment, in politics, and they build up a following for them. They're seen and heard to say all the right things, like we were saying earlier. So you think they're one of you, they're representing your interests, and you let your guard down because you think you can trust them. But all the time, they're steering off culture in pre-planned directions, being belief systems, thoughts, perceptions, prejudices into the collective mindset of the general public. And they have no idea it's going on, all because they put their faith in these false heroes and role models that they don't understand were served up to them as military-grade tactics in mass mind control.
And, you know, when you look at some of these concerts, and we like to analyse the things like the halftime show at the Super Bowl, but there's something almost like a ritual to it nowadays. I've heard you saying before about how, you know, it just takes the DJ to lift a hand and the whole audience do the same thing. And it makes you wonder on that energetic scale, Mark, and I know you've looked at this as well. I mean, what's really going on a metaphysical kind of plane when it comes to all of these people gathering together, being programmed with this music, this message, and in all of their minds almost as one, like a hive mind. Pardon the pun, but it makes the mind boggle. What's really going on when you see these big concerts?
Well, it's got to be having an effect, hasn't it? You know, I'm sure those of us that are old enough to remember can recall, like I made a reference to earlier, the very strange atmosphere that there was in Britain on the day of Diana's funeral back in 1997. I remember it well. I was DJing in a club in Cardiff that night, and so all through that day, that Saturday, we'd had televisation of the funeral, and there was this very somber mood over the whole nation, and it affected everyone. So I went out to DJ at this club, and nobody wanted to dance. Everyone was just standing around the outside of the dance floor. Nobody had any enthusiasm to party the way they would have done any other Saturday night. And it was obvious that the mood of the nation had been dictated by this one ritualistic event. And these are young people that you'd think wouldn't normally give a hoot about, you know, royalty or whatever, but even they were affected by it.
And this was like the UK's own JFK moment. I think anyone who was around at that time remembers exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news that Diana had passed, right? And that shows it was almost like a trauma-based mind control ritual that was going on.
Well, absolutely. And God knows what will happen when the Queen goes, whenever she does, if she finally does, what kind of somber mood there'll be then, sadly, in the nation. There won't be a somber mood in my house. I'll have the bunting and the party streamers out because...
you and me both. Sorry, you and me both.
Exactly. So I won't be caught up in a black cloud of despair on that particular day, but that's just me. So anyway, these events have an effect on the morphogenic field, basically, you know, this unseen realm in which we all live, where energy resides, and energy can be manipulated and shaped by the consciousness and the mood of large numbers of people. So if that consciousness and those moods are manipulated to be a certain way, it can have an effect on the desired outcome. A lot of people ask me, you know, what was the deal with this whole electronic dance music psyop then? So, you know, supposing you're right, and this whole thing was manufactured, what are they hoping to achieve by having these big dance festivals with large numbers of people under the influence of mind-altering drugs, with all these subliminal visuals being flashed up, all this occult imagery, and all these sound frequencies being loaded into this digitally produced music? And the honest answer is I don't know. And I think a lot of it is simply going to be down to experimentation. I think a lot of these events are massive social experiments. They're being observed, monitored, surveilled the whole time by these social engineers, and they don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be, but they just want to study what happens when you get large numbers of people together under those influences I just mentioned, and you've got music of a digital electronic nature permeating their minds, their consciousness, and helping to form this hive mind, this, shaping the collective consciousness of all these people gathered together in the same place. I'm sure a lot of it is just down to observing what happens. I think that's what.
Yeah, a lot of the science will be, and this is really important, because this hive mind, this is a big kind of facet of the transhumanist agenda. They would love nothing more than all of us to have some kind of technology that hooks us up to the net. We're all got collective thoughts and everything that nice that comes with that. But, they'll still want to control that. And I imagine that when they, on this kind of scientific level, Mark, when they're looking at all these people gathered together, some of the kind of data they're getting back, that will build into models. And from there, they'll be able to control the hive mind of the future that they're creating. And this is where we get a golden thread through the recent shows we've been doing again, because you mentioned that morphogenic field there a moment ago. And last week we had Nick Redfern on the show talking about the Slender Man. Now, the Slender Man, we were talking all about tulpas and the power of thought forms. And here you have some of these concerts, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes like 100,000 people all concentrating on the symbolism, the messaging, the music, and together, collectively creating that hive mind. Who honestly knows what ripples they're sending out into that field, maybe even shaping future events with some of the stuff that's going on there? You really, it's an open box. It's Pandora's box, because there's so many things that could be going on with the technology they have.
You might remember there was a story that emerged a few years ago concerning the morphogenic field again, and the way it seems to have been affected by the fear and the trauma that was brought about by the events of 9/11. You may have seen this. There were sort of graphs that showed how the fear-based energy levels of the collective general public in different parts of the world were affected by the news of that event. So they showed you 10th of September 2001, what the levels were of this particular type of energy, these frequencies that were being exuded by humans. And then on September 11th, there was this massive spike in this low density fear-based energy as people all panicked and got traumatized by the events of 9/11. And then eventually, as the weeks go by, it all sort of dies down back to normal levels again. So that's a good example of how the consciousness of large numbers of people can be manipulated and affected by an event. So I'm sure there's a lot of that going on at these big dance music festivals. People react to it in different ways. So since I've put out my work giving my views on what's really been going on with this whole dance music scene for the past 30 years, obviously there's been a lot of denial. There's a lot of people telling me I'm an idiot, I'm a moron, I don't know what I'm talking about. I was actually a part of those scenes, I was actually at many of these parties, and I'm very familiar with the way that whole thing took off. I'm old enough to have been a part of it in a way that I wasn't with the 60s counterculture. So I do come with a slightly informed perspective, but I still get told I don't know what I'm talking about, and people just aren't having it. They say, no, this thing was pure, man. This changed my life. Doing ecstasy, doing mushrooms, doing acid has opened up my consciousness to new levels, and I'm in a place now where I wouldn't be if I hadn't done all that stuff, and the dance music scene saved my life. I'd be in prison now if it wasn't for going to these raves, and that may well be the case. But you also get other people who will say, yes, I can see it now. I can see the manipulation that was taking place. I actually regret doing so many drugs. I regret hanging out at so many raves because I can see that I was wasting my time and it was taking me away from other constructive things I could be doing with my life and applying my energy. And I had some really bad experiences on drugs. Some people say I'm now schizophrenic, I've got psychosis, I've got other mental health issues as a result of doing too many drugs. So everyone comes with a different story. It seems these things affect people in different ways. But either way, this whole scene did change society. And we've now got results and outcomes that would not be there if this movement had not been there in the first place, or had not gone off the way it did. So it has changed culture, it has changed society. Maybe there is an experimental element to it, like I was saying, where it's just being observed and they just want to see what happens. But changes have taken place, and the people that have been involved in this have been guinea pigs and lab rats. And who really honestly can be happy about finding out they've been a lab rat against their will, without their knowledge? I'm never happy to discover That's happened to me.
And,
And nobody else should be either. You should be pretty mad about that.
That's what really inspired you to really get into all of this series of books. And exactly, I mean, when people find that out, I mean, it's not enough just to sit there and accept it and then carry on. And that's the way you treat the information that you present as well, Mark, because like we said closer to the start of the show, I mean, yeah, it can be very infotaining, some of these kind of factoids that I call it infotainment. But there's so much more that we need to do on the back of this. It's not enough just knowing this. It's doing something with it, isn't it? Before the next generation and the one after that, they too are lab rats in the same kind of system we've been in.
We got the opportunity to learn from this, to learn from what's been done to us and resolve to not allow these things to happen again. So, yeah, it's not enough to treat all this stuff as infotainment. There's a temptation to. It can be very titillating and stimulating to look at all this stuff and work out which artists are mind controlled and spot all the symbolism in videos and things like that. Like I say, I put all that stuff out there so that it can be treated as entry level material to bring people into this whole realm of truthful information. If that's going to be the little epiphany that they need to get them on the path, then I would say that's a job well done. But you can't just leave it at that. You can't just spend years and years and years looking at this stuff and saying, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And look at that in that video. There comes a point where you have to move it on. And the most encouraging thing that a researcher such as me can hear from somebody is not, thank you for your work. It's really interesting. But thank you for your work. It's motivated me to get on the path myself now to doing something about this. I want to alert others to what's going on. I want to start engaging people in conversations, meaningful conversations about what's being done to us in terms of mind control and the way we're all being culturally manipulated. And, you know, I'm going to undertake some kind of activism to place obstacles in the path of this control system that wants to enslave us. And so much of this comes down to what is known as natural law, universal law, the law of cause and effect, consequentialism, whatever you want to call it, which is where this reality is structured in such a way that our thoughts, emotions, and actions have a direct bearing on the type of physical experience that all of us undergo. That happens on an individual basis and on a collective basis with a society. So the creator, whatever the creative force is behind this place in which we find ourselves, and who really can deny that there is some greater power that is a little bit more important than us humans. We're under the dynamics of this creative force, whether we choose to accept it or not, or like it or not, or whether we believe it or not. There are certain functions in this realm of reality that go on either way. And the way it works is it dishes out consequences according to the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that we choose to take. So we are gifted with free will as sentient human beings, and we can choose whether we take actions that are in line with morality and the golden rule that falls under natural law, the non-aggression principle, which can be stated as do no harm. Do not treat others in a way which you would not be treated yourself. Do not put harm into the world, basically. Do not undertake behaviors that cause harm to other sentient beings. If everyone were to understand that golden rule and apply it in their lives, the resulting physical manifestation that we would get would be very different to the one we've got now. We live in a world of chaos and destruction and death and misery and suffering because not enough people understand how this dynamic works. And we've been manipulated and programmed not to understand it, of course. We've been manipulated and programmed into a satanic mindset.
Exactly. This would be the best Mandela effect ever, Mark. If 7 billion of us just changed our mindset overnight, we would wake up tomorrow and literally the change that we always crave, it would already have happened. It's been a blast hanging out with you tonight. Now, quickly, we've only got about 30 seconds, but one of the listeners at work right now, Melissa, we might be smashing one of her idols here, but Dave Gilmore, Pink Floyd. Is he a good guy, bad guy? Is he one of these kind of lifetime actors?
I suspect he is. Comes from an aristocratic background. I suspect that he was inserted into Pink Floyd to have an effect on where that group would go. He was brought in at the time that Syd Barrett had to be kicked out because basically he was going mad and insane, supposedly from too much LSD, although it was probably mind control that was responsible for that. He also is said to have discovered Kate Bush and put her on the map, and there's a lot of suspect things about Kate Bush that I've discovered in recent times too.
On Kate Bush, but Mark Devlin, ladies and gentlemen, check out the book, Musical Truth 2. I'll be back tomorrow night. Until then, wherever you are, make it TFR. Touch that dial.